because this worked perfectly last night. Hopefully people are still with us. If not, they'll have to listen to the recording. So I'll get right at it. Jillian introduced me. I don't know what she said, so she could have said anything. I'm not sure because I wasn't there. Yeah, I am working at King's Landing. And before I want to get started, I just want to acknowledge that the territory that I am presenting from is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which these nations first signed with the British Crown in 1726. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of land and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik title and established the rules for what was going to be an ongoing relationship between them. So I'm thinking it's important to always acknowledge who is here before us. So the purpose of the presentation is to present the facts as I understand them, not to take a stand on whether the Mactaquac Dam was good or not so good for the area because I wasn't here when it opened. I started at King's Landing 30 years ago. When I first started, it was vaguely mentioned that King's Landing was there because of the Mactaquac Dam, but it was never fully explained to us how and why, or indeed how much of an impact this dam had on the St. John River Valley. So I never really learned this backstory until I had access to the corporate records because I was managing the records. And then I started to put the story together. So that is what I want to share with you today. Now, beginning in the 1940s, there was an increased need for electricity in New Brunswick. The power grid couldn't keep up with without importing electricity from elsewhere. And so the only solution was to generate it in New Brunswick. And this is a picture of what everybody needed from 1940 to the 1960s. It's an electric washing machine. People were wanting washing machines. They were wanting televisions, radios. Electricity was in high demand, but we couldn't keep up with it. And the New Brunswick has had a history of building dams to generate hydroelectricity. The first was the Milltown Dam in St. Stephen, which was built in 1881. And there are currently 5 major hydroelectric dams in New Brunswick. There's Beechwood, built in 1955, Grand Falls, 1926, Mactaquac, 1968, Sisson, about 1965, and the Tobeka between 1951 and 1953. Now, it was recommended to the New Brunswick Electric Power Commission that they develop more hydroelectricity along the St. John River. And there was a document that was created in 1960 called The Effects of Storage of Power Generation in New Brunswick. It was the first suggestion that Mactaquac was to be the location of a new dam. However, the report wasn't released to the public until 4 years later, 1964. Now, going up to our centennial year, 1966, the federal government stepped in and provided us with a fund called the Rural Economic Development Act. And this act is important because this act got us all started on where we are today. Now, the Federal Atlantic Development Board granted the New Brunswick $20 million to build the Mactaquac Dam. And the Mactaquac Dam was going to cover over 55 square miles. It was going to make it a reservoir or a head pond or a lake. And the areas that it was going to be, this head pond was going to be created on, were going to be expropriated by the New Brunswick Electric Power Commission. And this included over 10,000 acres of land. And in the end, 3,000 or more residents were to be relocated. Now, I'm going to throw out a lot of government agencies and government terms. You don't have to understand all of them. They're just all simple steps leading up to the final. Some of them became obsolete quickly. Some of them stayed on for a few years. But getting back to the expropriation. Expropriation is, by definition, the action by the state or an authority of taking property from its owner for public use or benefit. Now, before 1968, most expropriations were conducted on what was called the common law basis, and there was no legislative oversight. Basically, the expropriation favored those that were purchasing up the property and land from those that were selling. Now, New Brunswick didn't create its own expropriation act until 1973, which is long after the dam was created. And this new act started to favor the people who whose lands were expropriated and taken away from them. They had more legislative power to negotiate for better deals, better prices, and things like that. Now, New Brunswick already had a policy in place of expropriation or history of expropriating land. In 1953, the federal government expropriated over 1,106 square kilometers to create CFB Gagetown. So this is not a new thing by the federal or provincial government. Now you have here a picture of the St. John River Valley. I apologize, it's kind of tiny, hard to see. I tried to figure out highlighting on PowerPoint. After an hour, I gave that up. But basically, it's there's a circle surrounding what's called the St. John River Basin. And the St. John River flows from St. John all the way up to northern New Brunswick. And there's a lot of streams and rivers that flow in and out of the St. John River. And it covers about almost 2/3 of New Brunswick. It's quite important because this historically, the St. John River Basin is the historic area for settlement and historically fed the province with fresh water, with land, with agriculture, with fishing. So this basin is quite, excuse me, quite important to our history. Now, in moving forward to 1966, H.G. Acres, which was a company, was contracted by the provincial government to design a rural development plan called the Mactaquac Regional Development Plan. Now, this is both the provincial and the federal government we're seeing New Brunswick as stuck in sort of a rural oasis where we were never going to get forward because we needed to develop. We need to move beyond our traditional ways of our economy. And they decided that for us. And they decided that this is going to happen. We're going to move away from this rural dependence to a sustainable economy. And so that's why they were creating all of these plans. And the recommendation was for what's called a growth community. And this included a pulp and paper sawmill complex, which was located in Mactaquac, and a large recreational facility, which is Mactaquac Park, as you see here in all its green gloriousness. And this was all part of the original plan. Mactaquac. Now, Mactaquac is located halfway between Fredericton and Woodstock, for those of you that aren't from the province who don't know the area very well. It encompasses, excuse me, the communities formerly called Otis, Lower Southampton, and Colleton, or I never could pronounce this, Colleton or Colleton. And on October 5th, 1967, there was a groundbreaking for the St. Anne Mactaquac Pulp and Paper Company Limited Mill, and this included a lot of funding from the provincial government. And the construction of the town began in 1966. Now, there is a gem of a community book out there called The Mactaquac Bend, 200 Years of History. It's out of print. You can probably find it at local library or maybe online if you're lucky. But it contains some wonderful and not so wonderful stories about people that their land and property were expropriated to form the town. And there's a couple stories in here, but if you can bear with me, I'm going to share the shortest of the two stories because it really brings home the personal impact of this expropriation and this move to rural development. And this is called The Dunlop's Move by Marilla Dunlop. The first official meeting with the people in charge of buying property that would be flooded out was held on March the 4th, 1966 in the Legion Hall at Colleton. In early spring, pictures were taken of the inside and outside of our home. A short time later, we were notified of the amount would be paid for our property. We were not asked what we'd be willing to sell for. After selling the house, we decided that building a new house would cost much more than the money we received from our own two-story home. Since we had first option on a buyback, we decided to buy our house back and move it. On May the 6th, we hired men to clear a building lot on our property at the top of a steep hill behind our house. On May 26th, the well drillers arrived to drill test wells for the town's water supply. They set up approximately 30 feet from our back door at the head of our garden plot. And I apologize for the clocks going off in the background. A good supply of water was found on June 14th, and what a muddy, wet yard we had. On July 28th, they started to dig our new basement. We had a dozen maple trees along a circular driveway, some of which we had to move. We put them in a plot in the woods near our new location, but we lost most of them since large trees do not move well in August. A few trees that did not hinder the moving of the house were moved the next spring. These were a living memory of our old property. We also moved many shrubs and perennial plants. Some we moved to a cottage at Davidson Lake where we lived during the moving period. Some we put in the plot at the top of the hill. The movers arrived on August 18th and broke into the ends of our basement wall and tore down the flue. The water in the hydro had to be turned off, so we went to the cottage at night. We were asked to pack our dishes, remove all pictures in the walls in preparation for the moving. By August 20, all the basement walls were broken in and the house was put on steel beams and a flatbed pulled by a truck. The moving was delayed because the main telephone and hydro lines had to be cut in order to get the house, which was too high to go under them, onto the roadway. With so much construction and moving going on, it was difficult to get all three parties working together. The Domlot family went to Fredericton on August the 25th, the day the house was being moved. The pressure of watching the move was too great. We couldn't imagine how this could be done without wrecking the house, or perhaps the furniture going out through the walls. Our house left its former location and was pulled onto the Campbell Settlement Road, known as Dog Street by the local residents. It proceeded towards the old government garage, up a steel ramp, which had been prepared for the move, and onto what is now the 105 highway. The truck turned left and went up the hill on what was just the bed of the highway, then under construction. Then it left the highway, crossed the field where the Anglican church now stands, and proceeded down over rough fields with pole fences being let down to make way. They went along near where Kane's house now stands over what is now Otis Drive to our new basement. Late that afternoon, with great anxiety, we arrived to inspect the job. We climbed up on a ladder into the house, discovered there was no cracks in the walls, and then all the doors opened and shut perfectly. A pop bottle that was sitting on the floor of the front porch at the start of the journey was still standing. We found hard to believe, me as well. With the exception of a hall tree laden with coats tumbling over and the door of the electric range pulling out, all was as we had placed it. We had just settled in when we were told we had to move again. We were informed that the land on which our house sat did not belong to us. However, this is proven to be wrong, and the fact is we own a little bit of Otis Drive. Our temporary telephone and hydro lines came up over the hill and were fastened to the trees. Many times during the winter months, we were without these services. I can well imagine. Up until September 21st, there was no road to our house. At this time, a rough base was made at the start of a road, but below our house, there was a mud hole, which was not filled in until the next spring. All winter, we took the car up to Austin Monroe's Lane, wet or dry, and many times drifted high with snow. All our supplies had to be carried. Many times, Mr. Monroe would take his tractor and bring us over to our house. All this for a want of a few loads of gravel in a mud hole. All that fall and spring, we carried a good supply of plastic bread bags in our car. The fields would be frozen and dry when we left home in the morning, but when we returned, we had to wade in mud over our shoes to get across the roadbed. We were asked to dig a deep trench in the spring of 1967 for our hydro and telephone lines. This we did, but objected when we were told we'd have to pay for the cable for our own power. My husband refused to do this because we had power before we moved and should have it afterwards. Our hydro cable was finally hooked up in November 10th, 4 days until the dam gates were closed at Mactaquac. During the winter of 1966 to 67, I made a daisy Afghan to keep my sanity. We had no neighbors and we couldn't see smoke from a chimney or light in a window. This situation I was not used to. If the flowers in that Afghan could talk, what a story they would tell. But as I look back on the events, it seems like a dream. The outcome is worth it all because we have had many We've made many new friends. We have a beautiful town to boast about, and we appreciate the modern conveniences that have been made available to us. So as I said, this is one positive story. For each positive story, there's probably stories that weren't so positive. Now, the Mactaquac Dam is moving forward. And as I said, not all of New Brunswick was behind the building of the Mactaquac. The Association for the Preservation and Development of the St. John River in its natural state engineered a very vocal opposition, especially in local newspapers. But despite all this opposition, Premier L.J. Robichaud instructed the New Brunswick Electric Power Commission to compensate and pay relocation costs for those whose land was expropriated, and to prepare to move buildings and graveyards. ARDA, Agricultural Rehabilitation Development Agency, funded by the federal government, agreed to form, and this is an important formation, the CIC, the Community Improvement Corporation, to help residents relocate, establish the town of Mactaquac, the Mactaquac Fish Hatchery, and the Mactaquac Park. Residents having their homes expropriated could buy them back and move them, as the Dunlotsa did. And some, such as the Embleton family who owned the Pearly House now at King's Landing, they bought their house back from the New Brunswick Electric Power Commission, and in this case for $1, and then they sold it to the Community Improvement Corporation. Now, what about King's Landing? The New Brunswick government didn't understand the value of heritage in New Brunswick. We didn't have no provincial archives. We didn't have a provincial archaeologist. But George Macbeth, as you can see at the top of this chart, he oversaw the formation of the Heritage Resources Administration. And they oversaw the Community Improvement Commission, Corporation, sorry, I got that wrong. And the Mactaquac Historical Project with, and David Weber was in charge of the Mactaquac Rural Development Plan, and William Bradford was in charge of the Mactaquac Historical Project. And they proposed to do this historic trail that was going to go all the way up from the Mactaquac Dam along the St. John River Valley with little stops along the way, talking about the history of the valley. But that idea was quickly abandoned for the idea of an historic village. Now, this is some of the first reports that sort of led to the formation of King's Landing. This was Peter Stokes, who was a restoration architect who worked for Upper Canada Village. And in 1966, in February, he wrote the feasibility study of the development of historic sites in Upper St. John River Valley. And he basically, his report looked at over 200 buildings that were made available to the CIC by the New Brunswick Electric Power Commission in October 1966. And of these buildings, Stokes concluded that 75 to 100 of them were worth considering. And it was Stokes who determined whether they were going to be moved, dismantled, or used for salvage, and what foundations and fireplaces could be rebuilt. Now, in the winter of 1966 to 1967, it was essential that all the buildings that were going to be moved needed to be done so before the winter ended. There was lots of vandalism and fire, which was occurring almost daily because these buildings were still in their original locations, waiting to decide what they're going to do with them. And after the CIC had their first choice of purchasing the buildings Stokes recommended, the New Brunswick Electric Power Commission went public with the sale of the rest of them. Now, going back a year, John Stevens, who was an architectural historian, did a survey of the buildings selected of historical interest. He was hired by the federal government. So basically, Peter Stokes recommended them, Stevens surveyed them, and the Historical Resources Administration chose them. Now, I love this quote by John Stevens. It says, "Since many of these buildings will be removed and clearing the head pond area, it is hoped that a number of them can be moved and either kept in continued use under private ownership or preserved in conjunction with area parks, such as a village recreation." This is the first time a village recreation is mentioned. Now, how are these buildings moved? They were moved by road, by river, both open and frozen. Most of them were moved by road in the winter because of the mud, and the roads were frozen, so it was easier to move them. The movers went to the homes in the fall before winter and removed them, jacked them up, removed them from their foundations so they wouldn't be frozen on their foundations. And in this image, they are preparing what's called an ice bridge or an ice road. The worker is spraying water over the river to make it smoother and to freeze it. And over 23 structures plus salvage material were moved over this ice bridge in March of 1968 over the course of 2 days. And the last house that was moved over the ice bridge was what's now called the Pearly House. And a local company called the Merchants were hired to move most of these buildings. Now, these buildings, once they were moved to what was called the salvage yard. And this property was owned by CIC, and it was in the Garden Creek, Longs Creek area in Prince William. And this is a picture of the Ingram House, who is moving over the ice bridge in all its glory, being pulled along by the truck. And this is the Longhouse. Now, the Longhouse is a little different situation because it wasn't going to be flooded, but it was located in what's now called the Woolastook Park. So they were trying to decide, are we going to use it as a caretaker's home? Are we going to sell it? Are we going to destroy it, dismantle it? Finally, the CIC decided that they wanted it. So in 1969, they had to float it upriver to the salvage yard. A lot of bridges were destroyed when the head pond was created because it changed the nature of the water. So a lot of new bridges had to be built, and Longs Creek Bridge is one of them. So the house couldn't fit over the Longs Creek Bridge. It was too big. So the only solution was to pull it and tow it upriver by the water. They also towed the barn. Unfortunately, the barn came loose from its tow and started to go back downriver. That was quickly remedied, and basically, from what I got from the correspondence, it's like, yeah, let's not mention this. It's not going to happen again. We did get the barn. They were able to salvage it. Many of them came by road, including the Jocelyn from Prince William. I know some of these pictures are hard to see because they're about over 50 years old, but in the upper left corner picture, if you can see it, there is a crane that moves along with the houses, and this crane is pulling up the telephone and the electrical wires so that the houses and buildings could move underneath of them. And then the buildings were stored after salvage, and this building, I've been trying to identify, maybe somebody on the presentation recognizes it. I've compared it to the Ingram. It wasn't the Ingram. It could be the Hagerman. I'm not quite sure. That needs more investigation. And in January 1968, the notice was given that the rush is on because the Mactaquac Dam was going to start flooding in the spring for a possible opening in June. So they set up the salvage yard, and they didn't use all of the structures that were in the salvage yard for the recreation of the village. They made piles of architectural elements, boards, fireplace surrounds, things like that. You can even see a wagon wheel here. And they made over 200 piles of salvage. And at the peak of this moving and salvaging, there was over 120 people employed in the project. Now, I like this quote by R.T. Shawcross, who is one of the people in charge of this project. And he quotes, "It forms part of the overall Mactaquac plan to establish a stable economy for residents of the affected area, to provide year-round employment, to train them in the new skills or advance their present level as tradesmen, to entice them away from seasonal employment and the so-called barter economy." Remember, I mentioned early that there was a big movement by the federal and provincial governments to move New Brunswick and many places across Canada out of their rural dependency, give them new skills, new employment, strengthen the economy. And this is all part of that grand design. Now, in 1968, the Mactaquac Dam opens. And what do we do with all these buildings? Well, early on, the idea was to set up the historic village. And it was going to be originally funded by the federal government. And it's going to open on the St. John River, but the question is where? So there were 3 possible sites that were proposed: Pokiok, Jocelyn Brook, and Little Mactaquac. Pokiok is also called the Burden site and is close to where King's Landing is now. Little Mactaquac was close to the other side of the road from the present day Mactaquac Marina. Now, Lieutenant General Sam Sansom was the president of the York-Sunbury Historical Society. And in this capacity, he volunteered the society to conduct the study into various sites that would be appropriate for the historic village. The York-Sunbury Historical Society was tasked with recommending the location. Early on, they preferred the Burden site, in Longs Creek, Garden Creek. Though it's far away from recreational facilities and hotels, which was a big thing. And then many others preferred the Little Mactaquac site because it was closer to Fredericton than Mactaquac Park. Now, local citizens in the Kingsclear area up to the area of Mactaquac and down to Harvey prepared a petition for the Prince William site. So there's a lot of local interest in bringing it to the Prince William site. Now, Peter Stokes recommended that the project should represent well all phases of life of our people from the earliest times to the near present. And in September 1966, research historian W.A. Spray went to other historic villages like Old Sturbridge Village, Upper Canada Village, and Black Creek to study how these villages were set up. And once he came back from these trips, it was the point that they decided that the concept is going to be a living village. This is what the historic village is going to look like. Now, funding for the project ended up being 75% federal and 25% provincial. And the provincial government was almost decided where this historic village was going to be set up, but I found this document from the Department of Education. It's undated. I'm not sure when it was reported, but it's a report and recommendation to the Executive Council stating that the government must accept the Prince William site as the best and most reasonable location. Now, I'm going to tell you why, and this reason might surprise you. Little Mactaquac was ahead in the preference for where this village was going to be, but this report quotes, "The decision has raised some objections from residents on the south side of the St. John. A complication has also arisen, and this is key. To build on the Mactaquac Arms site will involve expropriation of 2 and possibly 3 properties. The federal provincial agreement prohibits expropriation and hence any cost sharing in such situations. In recent years, expropriation has stirred up a great deal of local resentment, which has now diminished considerably. It is suggested that we not stir up these resentments again. So the Minister of Education asked permission to be given by Cabinet to commence work on the site at Prince William." Now, as soon as the structures were surveyed, the Historic Resources Administration was locating artifacts to preserve for the project. When the houses were vacated, artifacts could be removed because they were given permission, they were owned. And the CIC also offered to clean up the properties for the owners and acquired a few artifacts that way. Now, W.A. Spray, the research historian, felt that in the beginning, the chief concern was to clean out all the houses of anything considered remotely useful in the actual restoration of the village complex. And Ivan Kroll, he's well known in the Fredericton area, was working independently, but was also purchasing artifacts from local residents. And he had this large collection of things that he had purchased from people that were moving, leaving their homes, and basically were trying to, downsize. And he turned the collection over to the York-Sunbury Historical Society with the proviso that it be sold to the Community Improvement Commission, and it was. Now, this chair is part of the Ivan Kroll collection. And it came from Robert Gray of Kings Clear. And Robert Gray's farm is directly opposite the highway exit to the Mactaquac Dam. And Robert Gray lived from 1885 to 1978, and it was the son of James Gray and Sarah J. Mitchell, and he married Grace Pincombe. Now, the chair was made by Alexander Mitchell, and Alexander Mitchell was a Scottish trained cabinet maker, immigrated with his family to Scotch settlement in 1827. His sons, Alexander and Robert, became cabinet makers in Fredericton, but his third son, James Mitchell, became a house carpenter. More than a house carpenter, he dealt with house finishes. And he worked on what's now called the Ingram House, the Hagerman House, and the King's Head Inn. Now, the artifacts that were collected were stored in the barracks in downtown Fredericton because we didn't have a place to put them. But we did build a warehouse in 1967 that was located near the salvage yard. And this on the former Forbes Kelly property. Gratefully sold the property to the CIC. Now, what suffered during these years was research on the families who owned and lived in all these houses that we were selecting. Land claims, land title deeds, and things like that were being researched, but for the most part, research took back stage to let's get them in, let's get them restored, let's get them set up. And in 1969, the names King's Landing was finally chosen. And it's called King's because it's on the location of the land that was originally granted to the King's American Dragoons, who was a loyalist regiment. And Landing refers to the St. John River historic use of the St. John River as a landing place. And in 1974, we formally opened King's Landing Historical Settlement to the public. Now, why were the things that we chose for King's Landing, and when did they open? Stokes made the recommendations from the salvage buildings, and King's Landing later moved some buildings in from elsewhere. Originally, it was supposed to be just the buildings that were in the head pond, but we did move some buildings in from elsewhere. Now, I'll just go through a list of the ones that we have now. 1971, Hagerman was open. It came from Bear Island. 1972, the Jocelyn was open, came from Prince William. 1974, the King's Head Inn came from Longs Creek. It opened, as well as the Lint House from Queensbury, the Long House from Longs Creek, the Blacksmith from Debec, the St. Mark's Church from Kingsclear, the Grant Store from Southampton, the Parish School from Queensbury, the Ingram from Queensbury, the Eustis from Queensbury, the Bridge, which is a reconstruction, and the Agricultural Hall, which is a barony school. And I'll just stop and say there's a bit of confusion about the Agricultural Hall. When the barony school was moved into King's Landing, it's the building that's up by the little parish school. And it was called originally the Agricultural Hall, but then it later became the Prince William Coffee Shop, the Prince William Ice Cream Parlor, the Barony General Store. And now it still sits up there by the parish school. But later in the 70s, we located another building. It was expropriated, but it was bought by private individuals who moved it upriver and turned it into a gift shop. They sold it back to us, and this was their former Pokiok school. We moved it into King's Landing, and we designated that building as the Agricultural Hall. Now, in 1975, we moved the iconic stone house, the Jones House, from Prince William, reconstructed the sawmill, moved in the Pearly, it came from Queensbury, the Smith or the Fisher House from Fredericton, the Clean from Hanwell. 1976, the Moore House was open. It came from Queensbury and it was opened by Queen Elizabeth II. In 1976, also the Brunswick Lion was reconstructed and then launched. And in 1978, the Welcome Center opened. When we first opened, we were using a little building that belonged to the Hagermans. It was their former blacksmith shop, and it is now the print shop at King's Landing. In 1984, the grist mill was reconstructed. The lint barn was the picker barn was open. 1987, the print shop was opened. Like I said, it's the Hagerman blacksmith shop. 1996, the Ross Sashendorf factory. It was a reconstruction. Year 2000, Presbyterian Church came from Prince William. 2001, the David Gorman Carpenter Shop was opened in the Scott Barn. The Neil Denon Wheelwright Shop and the William Donaldson House from Fredericton were open to the public. And finally, in 2009, we reconstructed and opened the Gordon House. Originally, we brought the Gordon House in from Fredericton, but it didn't get reconstructed in the original plans. It sat on the property and it became so dilapidated we couldn't rebuild it, so we had to reconstruct it. Now, the barns, except for the Jones barn, the outhouses and the carriage sheds were all salvaged from existing buildings. And when, like I said, when the village was first set up, there was not enough research had gone into who was living at the houses at the time we were interpreting. And they didn't have a set date for these houses, except they were before 1870. King's Landing, what they did was created fictional characters to be living in the homes, or vague designations such as the Loyalist Farm, or which was the Jocelyn, or Pioneer Farm, which was the Colleen, and so on. In the early 1970s, more time was dedicated to research. So the families took on the families that we see today, and we set different time periods for the different houses. Now, last year, we moved to just interpreting these families within a 10-year time span from 1853 to 63. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. So time for questions, if there is any.
So Evelyn, there were 3 questions in the chat. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. And Jennifer Wide is suggesting that that house that you were wondering about might be the King's Head Inn now.
Okay, it could be,
And Brenda O is saying, or is it possibly the Slip House, SLIPP, although she's thinking that may have been acquired later.
I think the Slip House was acquired at that time, and that is also a possibility because it had a veranda, and there was a veranda on the front of this building, but I'll definitely look into either one of those. We have a great volunteer at King's Landing called Debbie Jordan, who can take a look at these older pictures and pretty much tell me who and what they came from. I should have.
Brenda O is also saying that she might have heard somewhere that originally a possible alternate site in Albert County near Hillsborough was considered for the village.
Okay, that's interesting. I've never heard that. Yeah, Brenda, we'll have to chat. You'll have to tell me where you've heard this. I'll look into that.
And that seems to be all I have questions wise in the chat. And I'm just going to go to gallery view. So if there's anybody out there who has a question for Evelyn, one more, I'll go to the chat in a second. If there are any of you out there with a question for Evelyn and you want to show your video and raise your hand, I'll have to flip between 2 screens, but I'll try and cover you. But Evelyn, the Gleasons in Bangor volunteered at King's Landing for 23 years.
Yes, I know them well.
Okay. They are commenting that the Brunswick Lion was an integral part of St. John River farmers' lives, but has been scrapped, and that segment of the Valley history has been abandoned. And do you know if there are any plans to return that representation?
I can say stay tuned for this summer. There's some plans underway to highlight the importance of the waterways and the boats on the waterways in New Brunswick. The New Brunswick Lion was not an actual wood boat from the 1800s. It's a scale model of what they look like. And it was in its glory. It was beautiful. We loved it. And who knows, we might, might build it again.
All righty, thank you. One more, the Gleasons are commenting that even the pier in Courser's Cove has been removed.
Removed, brought back, removed. I'm not sure what right now, but I do know what he's talking about, and might have been a safety issue, but I will look into that and see if it's still there or been removed or brought back.
Right. Okay. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Last call for any questions from the floor. I don't see anyone. Everyone dutifully has their microphone and screen shut off. So I don't see anyone else. So I guess what I will do is thank you, Evelyn, for that
No
very
problem.
interesting presentation. I personally have to go back to that section about that chair and what you had to say about the Mitchells, because as some of you know, I have letters written by Michael Mitchell, brother of Alexander and Robert, from the family in New Brunswick to my family in Ontario. And I'm always looking for more information about the Mitchells, yes, one of Michael's letters actually says that they left Scotland on April 10th, 1827. So Evelyn, it was wonderful of you to take the time to share your passion and your research with us today and give us all this excellent background into the development of King's Landing. Viewers will be able to access the recording again. Give us a couple of days. Russ will do a little bit of editing, and then it will be up on a link on the website and the Facebook page in the next few days. Next Sunday, April 10th, we invite you to join us again for the next installment in the series. And it will be Dr. Leah Grandy presenting Researching Loyalist Stories, using the Loyalist Collection to recover the lives of New Brunswick Loyalists. I want to thank all of you for attending today and for your support of the Historical Society and our events. Please go to Facebook, stay up to date with our future news and events and projects. Please give us a like on Facebook. Personally, I don't quite get Facebook, but I know it's important to like. So please give us a like when you go to Facebook. And remember that we're always looking for new members, and it's only $5 for the year. And you can join these monthly meetings and get to know all these great people and maybe take on a project in helping with the restoration and the presentation of the museum, the old school, and the store on, I think it's Highway 610. Is it 610? Yeah, Russ is nodding. I think, no, not
610. No?
613.
613, that's what it is. Right. 613. I knew it was in the neighborhood. Okay.
616, Highway 616.
616. Okay, great. Good. So if that's everything, thank you everyone who attended, and I will end the meeting unless I get a frantic gesture from Russ or Evelyn about anything. Nope. Okay.
I think we're good, and I really thank everybody for holding out. Sometimes Zoom is a mystery. I still don't know how that link of Anne's managed to just suddenly work, and I'm here, and magic.
Well, it was well worth it, Evelyn. It was a very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
And to Historical Society members, we are meeting on Tuesday. And any of you out there who want to join us, we do have a meeting on Tuesday at 7 p.m. New Brunswick time, at 6 p.m. Ontario time. And I won't try to figure out the rest of the continent, but you can figure it out for yourself. Good. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.